Hello and welcome back to Rewrite Your Story from Broken to Unbreakable. This is Module 6. By now, you're probably beginning to recognize just how big of a role your unconscious mind really plays in your life and how you can begin to tap into that part of you and heal from the inside out. In this module, I want to talk about something that everyone knows about, but that few people really understand, and that's boundaries. If you're like most people, boundaries are these vague things that you know are good and that you heard talked about, but when it really comes down to it, do you really know what they are, how to recognize them, and how to set them in a way that is healthy and builds intimacy? Growing up, boundaries were non-existent for me. In fact, in my family, boundaries weren't just ignored, they were viewed as dangerous, and so any attempts to have them were met with fierce rage and sometimes even punishment. I remember a few years ago talking to my mom, and she was saying, I just don't get it. I just don't understand this whole thing about boundaries. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I know. Believe me, I know. The truth is, boundaries are everything. And that's what this module is all about. But first, I want to back up for just a moment and review a few important concepts from the last module. First, remember that emotions are nothing more than a communication mechanism by which your instinctual, feely unconscious self can deliver messages to and from your self-aware, thinky conscious self. In other words, emotions are the language of your unconscious mind. Remember also that emotions are meant to deliver specific and important information to you in order to prompt action, which means you have to do something. And for the record, berating yourself for having the feelings, trying to talk yourself out of them, rationalizing them, or otherwise attempting to shove them down, that is the opposite of the action that your emotions are meant to spark. Because they're meant to motivate you, to move you to your highest potential. They are feedback from the universe, and they are the best tools you have to evaluate if you're on the right path. So many people are searching for meaning in life, for purpose. And if they would only tune into the energy around them and the messages from their unconscious minds, aka their emotions, they would discover that the answers are already there, waiting for them, just as they're already there waiting for you. Second, remember that a healthy human being feels all their emotions, which means there is no such thing as bad emotions because all emotions are data from your unconscious mind, which means they're all wonderful. Some just happen to feel icky. And finally, while every emotion is important, remember that anger is the one that I personally think we need to focus on the most, because it is the one we feel on a regular basis and it is the one we resist the most. And more importantly, anger plays a very important role in our lives because it is the emotion that lets us know when we are giving too much or receiving too little or when something isn't fair. In other words, anger is the emotion that lets us know when we need to check out our boundaries because something isn't quite right. So, what exactly are boundaries? Boundaries are about knowing where you are and where you are not, where you end and others begin. They are about knowing what is in your realm of control and what is outside of your realm of control, which means boundaries are directly tied to your sense of self and your place and space in the universe. And since anger is the emotion that lets us know about our boundaries, it means that anger is directly tied to our sense of self and our place and space in the universe. And what is the first emotion that we're taught to turn off or ignore? Yeah, oops. When it comes to boundaries, there are actually 4 different kinds. There are physical boundaries. For instance, I know I'm separate from the chair I'm sitting in because, well, it's obvious that the physical boundary of my body is separate from the physical boundary of the chair. There are mental and emotional boundaries. These are how we ask for what we need and keep ourselves out of unnecessary drama. And then there are spiritual or energetic boundaries. And these are pretty easy to notice. Have you ever had someone standing really close to you, and even though they're not physically touching you, they're like touching you? That's you picking up on your energetic boundaries. For now, I want to focus on your mental and emotional boundaries because, frankly, these are the ones we tend to suck at. Okay, so how do you know if your boundaries could use some tweaking? To answer that question, let's begin by examining a common concept: passive aggressive. We often use this term to describe people in our lives, maybe our partners or our coworkers or parents or children, but really, what does it mean? In essence, passive aggressive simply refers to a spectrum of boundaries, with being overly passive on one end of the spectrum and being overly aggressive on the other end. When we are passive, we focus entirely on the wants and needs of others. We tell ourselves that we are selfless and therefore good, and we build our entire sense of identity on our ability to help others. While this sounds noble in concept, the reality of living this type of existence is much more grim. Consider this: we live in a martyr based society, right? Many of the major religions of this time in our history are based on the virtue of sacrifice and martyrdom and giving yourself up for the greater good. In philosophy, we call this altruism or utilitarianism, which is an ethical doctrine that holds that the moral value of an individual's actions depends solely on the impact of other individuals or society, regardless of the consequences on the individual itself, which is all well and good, but spoiler alert, the martyr dies in the end. Not only that, but when we repeatedly and continuously put others' needs ahead of our own, we break a cardinal boundary. In essence, we deny our own existence. And since every boundary break alerts your unconscious mind, whose number one job you'll remember is to keep you safe, it then communicates to your conscious mind through the emotion of anger, which means that every time you ignore your needs in favor of someone else's, you are generating insane amounts of anger, which you would of course have to ignore, right? Because to acknowledge the emotions would be to acknowledge your needs, which is the opposite of what the passive person does. In relationships, passive people tend to lose the respect of their partners, which can then breed contempt, distance, and even emotional abuse. You can recognize the very passive people. They're the ones who always wear a smile on their face. They're the first ones to jump in, sign up, volunteer. They are giving and gracious and kind, and they really do love to serve because their sacrifice is the only way they know how to define their goodness and their worthiness. But as time goes on, it gets harder and harder to keep giving. They run out of things to give and they begin to wither, and they get resentful. But since they never learned how to acknowledge and express their needs in a healthy way, they often then become passive aggressive, where they waver between being really, really nice and passive and then exploding because of all the repressed anger. And thus, an angry nice girl or guy is born. On the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are aggressive, who focus only on their own wants and needs. When this tendency hits pathological levels, we call it narcissism. These people bully their way through life because it is the only way they know how to get their needs met. See, deep down, they don't trust themselves or others. They don't trust that they are inherently worthy of love, and so they demand it. And while they seem to always get their way, deep down, they're lonely and isolated because it is impossible to have a healthy relationship and experience intimacy from this place. Now, I want you to notice right in the middle, where these two places overlap, is a place called assertive. And this is the goal: to be aware and focus on your needs and wants while also taking into consideration the needs and wants of others. When we're in this place, we are content and balanced and getting our needs met with regularity. We put ourselves first, but not at the expense of others. And from this place, we can experience true intimacy without feeling suffocated or resentful. So how do we get to that place? First, let's do an inventory of healthy boundaries so you can begin to focus on where your specific strengths and opportunities for healing lie. Here are some examples of healthy boundaries. You see, when you find yourself having difficulty saying no to others, Doing things out of feelings of guilt or obligation, that's not a healthy boundary. When you find yourself attempting to please others even at the expense of what's best for you, that's unhealthy. When you're not expressing your thoughts and feelings when someone upsets you because you don't want to upset them back, that's not healthy. When you're putting yourself last and putting others first, this doesn't serve any of the parties involved. If you say yes to others who are asking of your time and energy and you've not filled yourself up first, you're giving from a place of lack, which is a fear-based choice and sours the energy in the relationship, and it doesn't serve either of you. And frankly, it also breeds codependency and prompts you to attract people and situations that drain you because you aren't honoring your own needs and boundaries. Many times, this way of being can create anger or resentment if you're constantly putting your needs behind others. This might manifest as complaining, feeling taken advantage of, or feeling powerless. These feelings are messages that you have chosen to perceive yourself as the victim of a circumstance, rather than stepping up and making choices for yourself based on love and compassion. Because the truth is, you are never a victim of your circumstance. You can choose how you would like to perceive something in any given situation. You can choose to perceive fear, or you can choose love. And when you act from a place of love rather than a place of fear, you'll experience a radical shift that transforms your struggles and breaks old patterns that are no longer serving you. Life without boundaries is chaos. So create your boundaries, set them in place to let the world know how you expect and deserve to be treated. This will send out a clear message as to what behavior is acceptable to you. Not them, but you. Your boundaries are your concern. Their boundaries are their concern. You have to set the parameters in your life of how you want your life to be. Your boundaries are your own and may be different than the boundaries of others. And others may not understand your boundaries, and that doesn't mean you are wrong, invalid, or inappropriate. This is probably a good time to talk about the difference between boundaries and walls, because we often get these confused, especially in the beginning. Walls are rigid. They are inflexible and non-negotiable. They can be controlling. And walls need guarding. Think about it. If a prison builds a wall around the perimeter, that's not really going to do anything. That wall then needs guards, and those guards needs weapons. Walls tend to promote aggression either in the person using them or in the person on the receiving end. And frankly, they take up a lot of mental energy. They're not fun to set. They tend to break relationships and intimacy. And that's why often we run away from setting boundaries, because we get them mixed up with walls. Healthy boundaries, on the other hand, are flexible. They're movable and negotiable, and they feel good to all parties involved, and when done correctly, they can actually build and strengthen relationships and build intimacy and respect. Now, when it comes to actually setting boundaries, there's one very important rule that you need to know. All boundaries must be tested a minimum of 3 times. Let me say that one again. All boundaries must be tested a minimum of 3 times. This is because of the way we learn and really has nothing to do with the person setting the boundary. You see, for most of us, 1 time is a fluke. 2 times gets our attention, but we're still not sure. But 3 times is a pattern. 3 times is when we become convinced that something new is occurring. Often, when we begin to set healthy boundaries in our life, we're disheartened to discover that the people around us tromp all over them, and then we get discouraged and say, "See, I told you," and then we give up. But the fact is, it takes a minimum of 3 times. For some people, they need to be reminded of your boundaries over and over and over and over again. That's not your problem. Your job is to hold the line for yourself, to stand up for your needs and restate your boundary from a place of love and compassion, no matter how many times the other person needs to hear it before they get it. Because it really is about them. They're the ones who have to get it. Because it's your boundary, you already know it. Another thing we tend to get wrong when we first start to set healthy boundaries is we use boundaries as an opportunity to tell people what to do or what not to do. For example, my favorite one, when I hear people say to someone, "You can't talk to me like that." Newsflash, people are allowed to talk to you however they want to talk to you. How someone talks is totally outside your realm of control. They're allowed to be rude and aggressive and just downright mean. You, however, can express your desire for respect and then disengage if respect is not offered. And don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Or we'll say things like, "I love you, but you didn't do the dishes like I asked," where we're telling them what they didn't do as opposed to what we need. So often in the beginning, we make it about the other person, but the truth is, boundaries are about your needs, which means you need to say what you need, which means, of course, you need to know what you need. Often that's the problem. We don't know what we need. We expect the people in our lives to fill that gap in for us. But I mean, honestly, if I don't even know what I need, what hope does anyone else in my life have of figuring out what I need? My needs are my responsibility. I'm the one who has to figure it out and then express it. If I wait for someone else to figure it out, they're randomly just throwing things at me and hoping that something works. And in the process, destroying the relationship. Boundaries are what you need, not what you don't need, not what you don't want, not what the other person should have done or didn't do or could have done. They are about your needs, period. Okay, so now that you're beginning to get what good boundaries are and what they are not, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Now, before you set boundaries with others, I highly recommend you examine and strengthen the boundaries that you hold with yourself, your internal boundaries. Because frankly, if these are weak or unhealthy, it won't matter what you say to the people around you. Boundaries with yourself are rules that you use to live by. They are your moral and ethical compass, if you will, and they define who you want to be. An internal boundary is like an invisible shield that prevents you from taking in a comment without checking it out first. For example, if someone accuses you of being arrogant, stop and consider the statement before taking it in. Ask yourself things like, how much of this is true about me? How much of this is true of the other person? Remember back to previous modules when we talked about perception as projection. It may have nothing to do with you. Or ask, what do I need to do, if anything, to regain my personal power or stand up for myself? So here are some examples of boundaries that I hold in my own life. Number one, if it's not addressed directly with me, I can choose to ignore it. This one came up because I'm part of a lot of different groups, and oftentimes, especially as women, we're not taught how to express our needs, and so we go through other people, right? Instead of going up to someone and saying, "Hey, you hurt my feelings," I'll just whine and bitch about it to someone else and hope that the message gets back to the original person. So I was part of a group, and something happened, and apparently someone was upset with something that I did. But instead of coming to me directly, they went to someone else, and then that person came to me and said, "Hey, you know, Sally is really upset with you. You might want to go talk to her." And I said, "No, thank you." Because the truth is, Sally is a perfectly fine adult who is welcome to come talk to me at any time. And if she has a problem, she needs to come talk to me directly. If this other person had never said anything to me, I would never even known there was a problem. And so I can ignore the fact that that person came to me. Because the boundary I hold is if it's not addressed directly with me, I can choose to ignore it and trust that the other person will bring it to my attention if it needs to be brought to my attention. For all I know, they were just complaining and whining, but it's really not that big of a deal. Another boundary I hold with myself, I'm not responsible for easing anyone else's emotional discomfort. I may want to, I may choose to, but it's not my responsibility. I don't have to. It's a choice. I only give advice to someone who has given permission and who has shown that they are open to receiving my advice. This boundary is for all you energy workers out there. I'm looking at you, Reiki people. This one drives me crazy, and I'm going to put this right out there. Please stop giving energetic healing to people who haven't asked for it or given you permission. It's just a massive boundary break on the energetic level, and it will absolutely blow up at some point. If you want to give energy healing to someone, ask permission. Also, if there's someone in your life who's constantly asking for your advice but never actually follows it, stop giving the advice. If you walk away from the interaction angry at the person and you want them to just stop, that's a sign that you're the one who has to actually do something. Remember, your emotions prompt action. You're the one who has to speak up. Okay, next, it's not my responsibility to solve all the problems. Believe it or not, it is not your responsibility either. People learn from their mistakes. People are motivated by their pain. If someone needs to hit rock bottom to learn whatever they need to learn to start their new path, it's not my responsibility to get in the way of that. Pain's important. Some people need their pain to move them along, and it's not my job to take that pain away from them. My favorite boundary I hold with myself, me first, always. This one tends to get people feeling a little uncomfortable. Now, there's a difference between me first and me only. And this is where we tend to get mixed up. Me first means that I always consider my own wants and needs first. And then I consider other people's and I find a solution that benefits all. Me only, well, now we're looking at the aggressive side of the spectrum, more towards the narcissism side. That's definitely pathological and unhealthy. Me first is necessary. I don't owe an explanation to anyone ever. I might choose to give one, but I don't owe one. Do you know, even in a court of law, in the US it's called the Fifth Amendment. In Canada, honestly, I'm not really that educated to know what it's called, but we don't even have to answer a question under oath. You don't owe an explanation to anyone ever. If you choose to give one, great, but you don't have to give one. You never owe it. And finally, it is my prerogative as a woman to change my mind. I like to remind myself of this often because truly, it's okay to change your mind. I highly recommend you pause this video and take a moment to just jot down a few boundaries that you would like to hold with yourself in your life. Don't worry if you only get a few down, and feel free to be inspired by some of the ones I share that I use in my own life. Just keep adding to the list as they come to you. Once you have a solid idea of your own personal boundaries with yourself, your internal boundaries, now it's time to begin to set boundaries with other people in your life. And the easiest way to do that is using what I call the magic formula. So, why use the magic formula? The magic formula uses specific linguistic patterns that help build relationships, overcome resistance in the other person, and reinforce your own needs. Plus, using this formula allows you to let your unconscious mind know that you're listening to and honoring its messages, and therefore reinforces your worthiness. So how do you use it? The first step is super easy. Pick one of the following. I agree, I appreciate, I respect, I love you. It's multiple choice. You only have those 4 options, and you'll notice the word understand is not one of the options. That's a mistake we often make when we're setting a boundary. We say, I understand what you're saying, but the truth is the word understand automatically brings up resistance in the other person, because put yourself on the receiving end. If someone says to you, I understand, instinctively, even if it's out of your awareness and unconsciously, you're going to be thinking, oh, no, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be arguing with me or saying something different. You'd be telling me that I'm right. So the word understand is automatically kind of puts the hair up on your unconscious mind's back. It's not one you want to use. So you're going to choose one of the 4. I appreciate, I agree, I respect, I love you, whichever one's most appropriate. You're going to follow that with the word and. Never, ever, ever, ever use the word but. In fact, feel free to banish that word from your vocabulary entirely. The only time you can be using the word but is when they're talking about the one that you're sitting on. Otherwise, just banish it and replace it with the word and. And is connecting. If I say, I love you, but you're stupid, who here actually heard the words I love you? But I love you and you're stupid, well, that means that both can exist, that my love for you is unconditional. You see what I mean? The first one, it's a condition. The second one, it's unconditional. And that's a very important distinction, especially to the other person's unconscious mind. The third part of the magic formula is to say what you need. So here's an example. I can appreciate that you want me to come into work an hour early, and I need a little bit more time to get there. Is it okay if I come in instead at this time instead? Or I love you, and I would love if you could actually do the dishes while I'm out tonight. That one's a great one to use. Now, in this case, the need was expressed as a desire by using the words I would love. So you can either say I need, I would love. You'll notice I'm not saying the words you to the other person. This is about my needs, what I would love. A boundary cannot be anything like, I appreciate you and you need to do the dishes. That's telling someone what to do. That is not a boundary, that's a command. And there is no world in which another person will hear a command and not go on the defense. By using the magic formula, both people get to participate in this wonderful negotiation where you get to express your needs and they get to know that they're part of this interaction. Now, what happens if you have someone in your life that no matter how you word it, just really doesn't care about your needs? These are those toxic people, the ones on the highly aggressive side of the spectrum. How do you handle people who think your boundaries are dangerous, or worse, who feel it's their job to break them down? Well, that's where we come to the magic sentence, and this is one of my favorite tools. Simply put, the magic sentence is saying, that's probably true, or that's probably not true. Pick the one that is truthful. Because at the end of the day, boundaries are about honoring your needs, which means they have to be truthful and honest for you. This is not about pandering to the other person and trying to make them like you or be nice, right? That puts it about the other person. This is about you. So when you're dealing with someone who's a little toxic and who just is not getting your boundaries, feel free to use the magic sentence. I once had someone say to me, you're just being difficult. And I giggled and I said, that's probably true. And see, that's the secret. Make sure you take a moment to reflect. Was I actually being difficult? Yeah. You know what? If I was self-reflective in that moment, I was doing it on purpose. And I was completely okay with that in that moment. Phew. It's been a wonderful 6 weeks sharing these tools and information with you. And I know you are beginning to experience the shifts and changes that can come when you begin to live life unbroken and truly become the author of your own story. As always, remember to decide that you want it more than you're afraid of it, because that really is the decision that can change everything. If this journey has sparked some curiosity in you and you're ready to take the next steps, please feel free to visit me online at www.livelifeunbroken.com and come join me for one of my live events. Or if you're beginning to see the light of hope and want to learn more about my one-on-one coaching, please contact me directly at info@livelifeunbroken.com. Ready to do some anger work and still need a little bit of inspiration? Remember that my online store has multiple designs for anger work pillows, along with water bottles, journals, and t-shirts to help you begin to express your new desire to live life unbroken. Simply visit my website and select Shop from the menu above. Thank you again for joining me for this journey. I am honored to have been your guide, and I look forward to sharing time with you again soon.